but this one I will be uploading it. So today we'll be mostly talking about the digestive system, the full digestive system. And I'm going to do a survey on the hormones, the different organs, the different enzymes, the different proteins, lipids involved in this. But before we do that, I just want to review a few things that we talked about last lecture, which will be important for you throughout the semester. So obviously, this is quite simple, but you learned that nutrients are actually chemicals in foods that are critical for human growth and function. And so there's 6 categories of them, not really 6 groups, because water is not really a group, it's one molecule. But there's 6 main classes, let's say. 3 of them provide you with energy, and 3 of them do not provide you with energy. So I don't want to see any calorie calculation for minerals, for vitamins, or for water, okay? And the scariest one of them is vitamins. People tend to think that vitamins give you energy. Your grandma probably told you to eat an orange so that you can feel more energetic. That doesn't work like that, okay? The only ones that give you energy are carbohydrates, fats and oils, and proteins, okay? That's the first concept. These are considered macronutrients because they are required in huge amounts in the scale of grams, while micronutrients usually are in the milligram to microgram amounts. So that's the first thing. And then within them, there are subcategories that we'll be covering, for example, essential amino acids, non-essential amino acids, etc. One thing that I want to clarify about vitamin P, okay? So this is important because I think it's important to make this distinction. You probably learned about essential amino acids, right? In the past, you probably learned that there's essential amino acids that you need from your diet, and there are non-essential amino acids because you either produce them in your body or whatnot, okay? Vitamins is not the same thing as that. So don't think about, when we say they need to be, they are essential for physiological function, it does not mean that you need to get them from your diet. It just means that your body needs them from wherever it comes from. So for example, vitamin C, and I'll use this example that was given to me by the student, vitamin C is produced in dogs. They make it. Ascorbic acid, they make ascorbic acid. So it's still considered a vitamin for them because without it, they would have problems like deficiency diseases. And so it's important for their function, even though they produce it, okay? And you'll see this distinction with the proteins when we get to the protein thing, okay? So this is one concept that you should not make a mistake with. Essential amino acids come from food because your body doesn't make them. Essential vitamins is just because your body needs them, no matter from where they come. Because there are some that are produced by bacteria, some by you, and some come from the food, okay? But anyways, this is for later. I just wanted to clarify the vitamin P story. So vitamin P is an old name. Scientists, what they like to do is every time they discover something, they name it, and they try to appropriate that, and I discovered the vitamin. So it did exist as a name. I did my research, but it's a name that refers to a class of phytochemicals called flavonoids. This is just extra information, okay? And flavonoids, there's hundreds of them, and so they are not really a vitamin, okay? They're not essential for your physiological functions. If you don't take them, you will not have a deficiency disease, and because of these reasons, it is not a vitamin. Okay? Cool? Good. So when you don't take these nutrients, something called deficiency happens. So there's 2 types, primary and secondary. Primary is when you don't eat enough of that thing. For example, if you don't eat enough meat, you'll end up having, or any source of iron, if you're vegetarian, you will not have enough iron, and that's because you're not taking enough iron. Secondary deficiency is when there's an issue with the body itself. For example, as I told you, I have celiac disease. Because of that, my body does not absorb properly the food. And so this is a secondary deficiency. So like, for example, if I don't have enough vitamin E from the food that I'm supposed to have, it's not because I don't take enough of it. It's because my body does not absorb it properly because I have this autoimmune disease, okay? And there's many examples of these. We'll take a look at what makes a secondary deficiency at the end of this lecture, and you'll understand. So then if we're talking about deficiency, there must be an amount of nutrients that you need to take that is healthy for you, right? And so there are these measures that were created by mostly the NIH and Health Canada that determine how much of a nutrient you need to take to be healthy. And this is for healthy people. Obviously, if you have a certain disease, it's a bit different, right? If you have diabetes, your sugar intake is different than a healthy person. And so these numbers will be different for you. But in general, there's 4 of them for nutrients and 2 of them for energy. Because the main reason behind this is to have the building blocks for everything that you have in your body, and then the energy to fuel these reactions and to keep you awake, etc. Okay? So for nutrients, there's 4 values that you need to know. The estimated average requirement. This is a number that is not based on really, it's mostly based on research, but there are some that are based on assumptions, okay? Because there are things that are not yet well understood, like certain minerals, molybdenum and whatnot, which you probably heard of, or maybe not, chromium. You don't know how much chromium you really need. So it's estimated, and this is the amount estimated to have 50% of the population healthy, okay? So the difference between the estimated average requirement and the recommended dietary allowance is that this one aims for 50% of the population, and this one aims for 97 to 98% of the population, and you see it right here, okay? These 2 are based on research mostly. When there is no research on this thing, then we take a look at the adequate intake, and this is just based on observations of what happens to people, okay? So this is kind of like we assume that because you need X amount of ATP, then we calculate backwards to the amount of sugar you need, okay? While this one is based on mostly actual tests on people, okay? The tolerable upper intake level is the maximum amount you can take as a healthy person. Beyond that, there's a risk of toxicity. If you take a look at, for example, multivitamins, they are different for men and women because of the iron amount. So you'll see that the men have more iron than the women in their multivitamins because we don't want to create toxicity in the women, okay? So all of them, most of them have, anything you take too much of it is not good for you. The dose makes the poison, and it applies for everything, right? Including the nutrients. You eat too much sugar or too much fatty food, you end up with obesity, diabetes, etc. Okay? Now for the energy, there's 2 of them, and they're very simple. One of them is the estimated energy requirement, and the estimated energy requirement just means how much calories do you need in a day. If you are bulking at the gym, or if you are trying to lose weight, if you are pregnant, if you are old, if you are a kid, that's a different amount. And so it's based on age, gender, etc. Okay? Right, so now let's say you need 2,000 calories a day. But those calories, where do they come from? Well, they come from a specific combination of carbohydrates, proteins, and lipids, because they're the only ones that give you energy. And so the AMDR determines the percentage of each of the 3 micronutrients you need in your food. So 10% to 35% of your diet should be protein, 20 to 35 should be fat. And why is there a range? Well, the range, because you can be healthy and pregnant, you can be healthy and old, you can be healthy and young, and so it depends on that, right? If you're trying to bulk at the gym, you're probably going to be closer to the 35% protein, right? If you're trying to lose weight, you're probably going to be closer to the 45% carbohydrate and 20% lipid. Make sense? Simple? Good. Okay, so we're talking about energy. How do we measure energy? So energy, you probably learned it in physics. Chemistry also. We use a system called the kilojoules and kilocalories, okay? And so a kilocalorie is basically the amount of energy that you need to change 1 kilogram of water, to increase the temperature of 1 kilogram of water by 1 degree Celsius, Kilocalorie, sorry. 1 kilocalorie is equal to 4.184 kilojoules. This one you probably know better from chemistry and physics, right? And now this is where you need to listen so you don't get lost, okay? There's two types of calories. There's the calorie with a capital C. That is the number that you see in your nutrition value sheet at the back of the box of your cereals. We use that number because otherwise we would have 90,000, 100,000 calories on the box, and it does not make sense. So Health Canada just decided to divide it, okay? So if I talk about calorie in capital, this is what you see behind your food nutrition value, right? On the nutrition value sheet of the food. If I'm talking about calorie, the small c, now we're talking about actual energy, okay? And I'll give you an example just here. So two constants that you need to remember. Fat, 1 gram of fat gives you 9 calories. And 4 grams of proteins or carbohydrates gives you 1 gram of proteins or carbohydrates gives you 4 calories, okay, capital C. An additional rule to this when you're trying to calculate the number of calories with a capital C is when you're talking about carbohydrates, you need to subtract the insoluble fibers because these are not metabolized by your body and they will be excreted or eliminated. And so these, you remove them. And you'll see it when you have on your sheet fibers. Well, usually it's either fibers completely and you don't know if they are insoluble or soluble or a mix of both, or they will sometimes specify it. And you can calculate backwards, right? Let's take an example here. So let's take a look at this nutrition fact sheet. So if you've ever asked yourself, where does this number come from? Well, you can actually calculate it, right? So all you have to do is take a look at the fat, the energy producing macronutrients. So fat has 1 gram of it. So 1 gram of fat times 9 calories per gram gives you 9 calories. If you look at carbohydrates, we have 27, right? But then you have to remove the insoluble fibers because these will not be metabolized. They don't go inside the glucose TCA cycle and then mitochondria, so they do not produce energy. So if you do 27 minus 11, that gives you 16. So 16 grams of carbohydrates times 4 calories per gram gives you 64 calories, and then 4 grams of proteins times 4 calories per gram gives you 16 calories. Make sense? If you add this up, it does not give you 90. It gives you 86 calories, which means Health Canada has been, or companies have been rounding up the calories you're taking. So if you think you're actually taking the amount that's on the sheet, usually you are taking less than that amount, okay? So you can try this at home tonight and see if the number up there matches your calculation. If it does not, that means they rounded up to the tens, okay? Now let's get back to the concept of small c and big C calories. So we found 90 calories with a big C here. So that's the equivalent of 90 kilocalories, and kilo is 1,000, so 90,000 calories. Make sense? If you want to find this number here, the kilojoules, all you have to do is multiply this value by the 4.184 number that I showed you right here. Cool? Easy? Okay. Good. So let's get into today's topic. So this is all you need to know from lecture 1 for the rest of the semester. So why do we want to eat? Everything happens in the brain, right? You guys already hear this. Everything happens in the brain. The cold, the pain, any feeling you have, it's in your head, okay? And I put this picture here because it represents what I'm about to talk about. This is hunger. You eat pretty much anything when you're hungry. Even if it's like food from like 2 days in your fridge and there's nothing else, you jump on it. Appetite, so there's two main reasons, hunger and appetite. Appetite is when you want cupcakes at midnight, right? Or you eat that, pot of yogurt at night, or ice cream or whatever, right? And these are controlled by hormones, which we'll be talking about. What you need to know is that hunger is a non-specific drive for food. Appetite is a desire to consume a specific food, which is usually due to environmental cues, right? If you're at the movies, you want popcorn. Well, not anymore because it's like $30 for the little thing there, but appetite is mostly due to environmental cues. Let's go try this restaurant, let's go try that restaurant. You see it on Instagram and then suddenly you want to cook it. That's appetite. Hunger is you open the fridge and you eat whatever the hell there is in there. Doesn't matter if it's good, not good, as long as it fills you up. So these I know you know. Anorexia probably didn't know, but it's not related to the hunger. It's a physiological need for food. So you want the food, but you have no appetite. So you're hungry, but you don't want to eat. Okay, so that's just something interesting to know. The primary organ, obviously, that controls all these feelings is your brain. The part that we're interested in this course is the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus controls a lot of the things that you have no control on. For example, the heat, your body temperature, muscle contraction that you have no control on. For example, your heart's muscles. Yep, it's all good. And so the hypothalamus is the one that triggers the feeling of hunger or satiation, fullness. This word is very hard to say. And it usually serves as a center that integrates all the signals that come from your digestive system to let it know if you're hungry or if you're full and whatnot. And usually this comes from hormones, and there's a few of them that we're going to talk about. It also comes from nerve cells that line your gut and your stomach and your small intestine. So when the intestine is full, your brain will receive the message saying, I'm full, don't eat anymore, right? And this is due to the nerve cells, but also some hormones in your body, okay? Additionally, there are the amount of sugar in your blood will control also the feeling of hunger and of fullness. And we'll talk about most of the hormones, but these two are the ones that you probably know, insulin and glucagon. So when you eat too much food, there's glucose in your blood, and that causes the pancreas to release insulin, and insulin tells your brain, I ate, that's it. Now, when there's very little sugar in your blood, then glucagon comes in and tells you, buddy, it's time to eat, okay? And there's a few of them. Here they are. It's important to know these, okay? So I'll tell you a few of them. Let's start by leptin. So if your body is making adipose tissue, it's probably because you ate too much, okay? So this is how you're going to remember it. So then leptin is released by the adipose tissue to tell your brain, that's it, stop eating. Okay? Ghrelin, on the other hand, is the opposite of leptin. So when your stomach and intestine are empty, it sends a message to your brain, the hypothalamus. They both act on the hypothalamus, leptin and ghrelin, to tell it, buddy, it's time to eat. Okay? When you eat, there's an enzyme released in your digestive system called incretin, which travels to the pancreas to tell it there's glucose in the blood. It's time to pick up the blood. This person has ate, so let's store the glucose. So the pancreas releases insulin, and insulin will travel to the brain and do the same thing as leptin. It will also travel to the liver to metabolize the sugar, to the muscle to metabolize the sugar. And when this happens, and when you've built your muscle and you've done all that and you have excess energy, then it will make adipose tissue, and that adipose tissue will release leptin to tell your brain too much food. Simple? Yeah?
So the insulin also tells the muscle tissue that you have to take some glucose out of the
Yeah. Yeah. Insulin is one crazy hormone. It targets pretty much anything, And anything you study, like from experience, anything you study in the lab, you find that insulin is moving away or another, okay? What did I want to say about this? Obesity. So a person that has diabetes, or a person, type 2 diabetes, for example, which is caused by mostly poor health choices. Sometimes it's genetic, but mostly poor health choices in the sense of not watching what you eat and not working out, sedentary kind of lifestyle. What happens in your body is that your body becomes insensitive to insulin. And because it becomes insensitive to insulin, your brain does not understand that it's time to stop eating. And so you just continue eating nonstop, okay? Same thing happens for people that are overweight. They are insensitive to insulin. Not insensitive completely, but a lower sensitivity to insulin. And because of that, the hormones are dysregulated. And so leptin is not released as it should be. And insulin itself does not act on the brain as it should be. And so it does not tell you you're not hungry anymore, stop eating, okay? Obviously, the more into these pathologies, the harder it is, right? Because you become more and more insensitive to these hormones. Hypothalamus, right behind your eye. And then this is the pituitary gland. We'll not talk about this here. So what are hormones? Obviously, you guys know this, but let me just repeat it for a millionth time. So they're just messengers in your body of chemical nature. They can be proteins, small molecules, lipids, depending on what we're talking about. And they enter the system they enter your system through the bloodstream. They're released by glands most of the time. And they help regulate body function. Okay, very simple. And this I just told you here. So when your stomach is full and there's a lot of glucose in your blood, your body will feel full because of these hormones. Right. Now, appetite. Appetite, well, hunger too, but appetite mostly is actually triggered by environmental cues like sight, smell, taste, texture, and hearing, right? Your misfickies, you hear them when someone else is eating them, and then you want to eat them. Fat food, the texture feels good in the mouth and triggers your dopamine circuit and your serotonin system, and that tells you this is good for me, and you like it, and then you eat more of it, and you know. Obviously, broccolis, you see them and as a kid and you don't want to eat them. It's just because they don't taste good. Some people do like them, but as a kid, they don't taste good, and so you don't want them. But, you know, candies, chocolate, as a kid, they trigger your sensory system that plays on these hormones, okay? Social and cultural cues, this also, if you're at a wedding, you're going to eat like crazy. If you go to the, I don't know if you guys did it, but you go to a buffet with your friends when you're like 16 and you eat there the whole day and they're trying to kick you out. I've done it in the past, so there's that. And learned experiences. Sometimes places will trigger, or more like, you know, some people eat specific foods at specific events. There are these families, for example, that at New Year will prepare always the same plate, and they'll gather all the same people and eat the same thing all the time. Or other more dangerous ones is, for example, you're sitting in a bar and all you think about is tequila. So that's another learned experience. Not very good, okay? And then next day you're not feeling too good. So this I talked about. Religion, obviously, there are many religions, but for example, in my religion, there are 2 days where we eat a lot of meat and we barbecue a lot. So this is linked to it. What else? Did I forget something? I think this is clear. No need to spend too much time on it. Let's talk about the food. How about this? So what happens to the food when you take it in? So there's 3 main steps that happen. Digestion, absorption, and elimination. So for digestion, large molecules are broken down into smaller ones, mechanically and chemically, and we'll talk about these 2 right now. Then when that happens, the smaller molecules get absorbed because they're easier to pass through the lining of your intestine, and then the remaining stuff gets eliminated as waste products. And this is what I was talking about. So the insoluble fibers that I told you to subtract from the carbohydrates, they are undigested. And so they do not produce energy, they don't serve as nutrients, and so they are eliminated, okay? Where does this all happen? It happens in the gastrointestinal tract, your GI tract, which is composed of a series of organs, one after the other, linked by these parts called sphincters. And so there's one between the esophagus and the stomach, one between the stomach and the intestine, one between the small intestine and the large intestine, etc. I think you get the idea. And these control the passage of food. And it's very important that they are in place, because if they were not in place, for example, you would have problems in your intestine, because the food released from the stomach is highly acidic, and that would cause burns in your intestine, okay? Same thing with, for example, the gastroesophageal sphincter. If your stomach is full and you're trying to add more food and there's no sphincter to prevent you from doing that, sometimes you feel it like it's blocked. You can't eat, right? Well, that sphincter is important because it needs to make sure that you don't just eat non-stop and just, choke on it, okay? So we're going to talk about all this. So hopefully you're not going to fall asleep. What time is it? Okay. So the first part where the digestion happens is actually before you eat the food. This is called the cephalic phase. And that's just when you're thinking about the food, or when you're hungry, your GI tract prepares for digestion, because it knows that you're not going to be able to resist and just run to eat, okay? And so the GI tract will start releasing these digestive juices, which contain a lot of acid enzymes to prepare for the food that's coming. Then you're hungry, so you go get that poutine, start eating it, and that's where the first part of digestion starts. It's in the mouth, okay? And so chewing, or the medical term mastication, has two roles. First, it's to break down the food mechanically, to make it into smaller pieces so that you increase the surface area that will be available for enzymes to degrade those molecules, okay? Because if you just did not break the food, then the enzymes will take days to just metabolize something very small. So you break it into smaller pieces, so then the enzymes have higher surface area. The second point of chewing is to moisten the food with your salivary glands that produce this mucus or saliva, and this saliva will help moisten the food so that it goes easily in the digestive tract, okay? Now, in the mouth, there's very little digestion that happens in terms of chemical stuff. So there are salivary amylases, so carbohydrates, starch specifically gets digested in the mouth, or begins to be digested in the mouth. There's bicarbonate that neutralizes the acid in the food, which is part of the saliva. This I just said here. And then there are antibodies and enzymes that will help fight bacteria from the food. Now, obviously, this system is not perfect, and so sometimes you do get intoxication, especially if you're abroad and you're eating food, street food, or drinking water from another country, okay? Because to have the antibodies, you need to be exposed to that kind of environment, and so it's not a perfect system, but it helps you for the place where you're in. And the enzymes are mostly general enzymes. They're not very specific, and so they target pretty much anything, but again, they're not perfect. Your taste receptors are mostly in the back of your tongue, not in the front, your taste buds, and they detect 5 different tastes, so bitter, sweet, salty, sour, and umami. I think you guys heard this previously. Umami is meat, for example. Salty, sweet, bitter. I guess the others are simple, just the umami one that is a bit, maybe some people don't know it, okay? Olfactory receptors. So here I'm trying to talk about the nervous system at the same time because everything goes together, right? And so the olfactory receptors, they detect the aromas in the food. During COVID, did anybody lose their smell? No? Some people? Okay, so I lost it, and I tend to put a lot of perfume. And if you know the chrome azaro, the blue there, it smells like from a kilometer, and I could not smell it, right? One thing that is very interesting about the olfactory receptors is that they prepare your brain for the food that is coming. So smell is actually important for the cephalic phase, okay? It's not mandatory, but it's important for it. It helps prepare your brain for digestion. When you smell cake and you want to eat cake, well, that's going to play on the hypothalamus, okay? What else did I want to say about this? Okay, so when you chew the food, it will produce a bolus of food. A bolus of food is just broken down food with saliva in it, basically. And this is important because it will help the food go down the digestive system. You can imagine that if you try to eat just meat without chewing it, it's going to hurt when it's going down. So this is very important. When food is going down, the tongue pushes it inside. That's the first thing. And there is also a movement called peristalsis that we'll talk about in a bit. But the food will be pushed by the tongue and it will go down your esophagus, right? There's something called the epiglottis. So your esophagus has two parts. You don't want the food to go inside the trachea because that's where your breathing happens. And so you need to close it. So the epiglottis is a clasp kind of that closes when your tongue moves to block the trachea so that the food does not go inside. You probably already tried to eat some food and then choked on it because the epiglottis did not do its job. Well, this is because of this, okay? And then your body starts coughing because it's trying to throw the food out from the trachea, okay? Then, this is the sphincter that I told you about that needs to control the amount of food that comes in at one time in the esophagus, and there's two of them, the upper one and the lower one. Extra information. Your salivary glands are right here, and you probably feel it sometimes when like you eat something sour, this part starts to kind of become more tense. That's because your salivary glands are trying to produce saliva to deal with the sour food or sour candy or whatnot, okay? So they're right here. What else? This I talked about. Okay, so now your nervous system has these contractions that happen on reflex. So they're autonomic. They do not happen because you control them. These are akin to the contractions of your heart. So it just happens by itself. You don't control it, right? So peristalsis is the same thing. The food touches those cells, those muscle cells, and what happens is that they react by moving, and they will move the food throughout the digestive tract. And we'll take a look at this more in depth at the end of this lecture. Make sense? Simple? Questions? Okay. So this food goes in through, gets kind of cut into smaller pieces. So the bolus that comes in gets cut into smaller pieces so that it travels more easily to the stomach. And obviously you're not just throwing food non-stop without taking, a break. You usually eat once and then twice. And so it's producing these boluses, let's say, that are going down. And so peristalsis will kind of just contract them and push them, right? So it will just follow the bolus until it reaches the stomach. And then there is a sphincter here that will open to allow the food to go in. One issue that arises from this the sphincter is sometimes it opens without having any food, and it causes something called gastric reflux. If you've ever tasted like you were just relaxing and suddenly there's acidic taste in your mouth, well, it's because this thing here kind of just did not do its job of protecting you from the, or your esophagus from the acid in the stomach. Okay? There are many diseases related to these sphincters, GERD, gastric reflux, something I'll tell you later. I forgot the full name, but is due to the fact that this sphincter is not working properly, and then the acids from the stomach go backwards, right? So this is not good. because they cause ulcers, and those ulcers hurt, but not only that, can lead to bigger problems. So that's it for the esophagus. Now the stomach. The stomach is where everything actually happens. Well, most of what happens for digestion. So the stomach contains 4 layers, and those layers, the most interesting one for us is the rugae, the innermost, and it's crinkled because it helps the movement of the food. And so the stomach just, usually it closes on itself. When it feels that there is food in there, automatically it will start reacting through this peristaltic movement and start mixing the food to produce this chime. And you can think of it kind of like your washing machine, just mixing everything and just, to try to get as much digestive enzymes touching as much of the food as possible, okay? The stomach can expand to hold 1 liter of food and liquid. This is true for 99.99% of the people, okay? Fighters usually do when they go, for example, for the UFC and they try to do the weights, and they're either cutting weight or whatnot, they will go on no food. That makes sense, right? Because if you're trying to make a lower weight, you don't want this extra kilogram here or more of food is going to affect that weight, right? Okay. If you didn't know, probably you guys didn't know, but extra information. One important thing about the stomach is its pH. So the stomach has an acidic pH. You guys know what pH is. It's just the potential of hydrogen. So it's the amount of hydrogen in your solution, right? And so you can measure it either as acidity or alkalinity. If the pH is above 7, then it's becoming basic or alkaline. If it's below that, it's acidic, right? So the stomach is acidic, and acids have an interesting feature. They are very good at breaking molecules. And so your goal in digestion is to break larger molecules from the food to smaller molecules. And so HCl is secreted in your stomach. And this HCl is important because it will activate other enzymes which are in the inactive form when there's no HCl. Now, if you've done biochemistry, actually you did, you probably know that HCl will hurt you if it touches your skin, right? And so how does the stomach protect itself from this HCl? Well, this is due to the lining. So this lining in the stomach has a layer of cells that produce mucus, and the mucus is basic. Because it is basic, it will react with the acid and neutralize it. And so it does not affect your stomach. Sometimes this does not work perfectly, and what happens is that you damage your stomach and you do feel it, and you have either ulcers or whatever, and then you need to treat it, okay? It's not a perfect process. Questions? No? Okay. Now let's talk about the hormones related to the digestion in the stomach. So gastrin is one of the hormones that we are interested in, and it's released by G cells. These G cells, so you don't need to know where they are found in the stomach or what layer or whatnot, just know the hormones themselves and where they are found in terms of organ, okay? So gastrin is released by the stomach, and it will stimulate kind of the stomach itself, so it's an auto feedback loop that tells the stomach to release these gastric juices, which contain, as I told you, HCl, pepsin, gastric lipase, and intrinsic factor. So one by one, HCl will denature proteins, will kill pathogens, and will activate pepsin. A lot of information. Pepsin is so everything is in the slides, okay? Just learn them by heart. But pepsin is an enzyme that is important for breaking down proteins. It is in the format of a zymogen. If you learned from your biochemistry, a zymogen is an inactive form of the enzyme. So the inactive form of pepsin is called pepsinogen, and then HCl will activate it by affecting the molecule in a way that it becomes active. That's all you need to know, okay? You don't want to have pepsin active in your stomach at all times because that could actually destroy your stomach, okay? You need these things activated at specific times, because if you do it while there's no food, well, there's more surface area of the stomach that can be targeted by pepsin, and that's a no-go. Okay. Same thing with HCl, etc. So you need these to be released at the specific time, and that happens through gastrin. Pepsin, I just told you, digests proteins. Gastric lipases, the word lipase should tell you that it breaks lipids. And the intrinsic factor is important for vitamin B12 absorption. So vitamin B12 absorption happens in your stomach. Okay? And then these are just the different cells that release these enzymes or acids. Parietal cells and chief cells. The chyme I talked about right now. Right, so another thing that is important to know is that these gastric juices, although it's counterintuitive, they also have bicarbonate in them. And so why would you have acid and then have bicarbonate at the same time? Well, they come at different steps of the digestive process. So first you have the acid that comes, but then you need to neutralize it, because you cannot keep just acid accumulating in your stomach forever, right? So at the end of the digestive process, the gastric juices will contain more bicarbonate to neutralize the acid. If you want to visualize this, so these are the cells that line your stomach. They produce the mucus. The mucus contains bicarbonate, and this bicarbonate here will be important in neutralizing the acid that is found in the gastric juices. Okay, so as you go down this gradient, so obviously they mix up together, right? But closer to the cells, the pH is 7. Further away from the cells, the pH is 2, which is the pH of hydrochloric acid. Okay, and obviously there's a gradient here. And these cells, they keep producing this bicarbonate. Because they keep producing this bicarbonate, this layer here kind of protects the cells from the acid. Okay. This I talked about. I think I mentioned all this. This is just a figure talking about what gets metabolized. The only thing that I didn't talk about in this figure is the fact that water, minerals, some drugs, and alcohol get absorbed in your stomach. Alcohol partly in your stomach. A lot of it is in the intestine also, but it's just to tell you where it starts. Drugs, same thing. Some of them get absorbed in the intestine, and others in the stomach. Question. So this is the type of questions that you'll be getting on your quizzes and exams. So which best explains why carbohydrate digestion stops when food reaches the stomach? Obviously, we didn't talk about this, but we talked about a few things. So just critical thinking a little bit. I talked about pepsin. Yeah. B. Salivary enzymes can't function in the acidic environment of the stomach. Yeah, this is the answer. So these enzymes that break the carbohydrates are found in the saliva and in the intestine, and both of them have close to neutral pH. The intestine not so much, but it's not the pH of 2 that you have in the stomach. And so some enzymes do not work in acidic environment. Enzymes that break down carbohydrates are one of those enzymes. So I talked about lipases and I talked about pepsin, gastric lipase and pepsin. These ones can function at low pH. Okay? Easy. The first one is not true. Carbohydrate is completely digested in the mouth. No, it's not, because as I told you at the beginning, that's the beginning of it, but there's more of it that's going to happen in the intestine. Intestinal enzymes are needed for carbohydrate digestion, yes, but partially, because it also happens in your saliva. Carbohydrate is completely absorbed in the esophagus. Well, this one This one is this one doesn't make sense, okay? Carbohydrates is completely absorbed in the esophagus. There's no absorption that happens in the esophagus, okay? Yeah.
You said that pepsin leaves less acidic environment in which
The gastric lipases. Obviously, in your stomach, you have acid, and acid breaks pretty much anything, but it's not as efficient on proteins than it is on carbohydrates. Okay, so obviously there is a little bit of breakdown of, but it's not the main thing that happens. The main thing that happens is the lipids get broken down and the proteins begin to get broken down. Okay? Because in reality, even the stomach itself is getting broken down by whatever is in it. Okay, it's acidic, it contains enzymes that break proteins, and so obviously part of it gets damaged, and then, right? But in general, for the food, proteins and lipids start getting digested in the stomach, not in your mouth. The mouth is the carbohydrates, and then the intestine is everything. Okay? And I'll get to the intestine. Yeah?
But like, it doesn't finish before the stomach, because,
No.
right? Because the process of digestion of carbohydrates continues in the intestine.
Yeah. This is just the first part. The intestine is actually where most of it happens. Because of the bile, because of many things, and I'll talk about this in a second. Okay, so we mixed the food with acid, we broke down a little bit the proteins, we broke down a little bit the lipids, then we neutralized the acid. Now the food has to go to the intestine. So there is a sphincter that connects the stomach to the intestine, and then that will release the food into the duodenum. This is the first part of the small intestine, and there's 3 sections: duodenum, jejunum, and ileum. Most of the absorption happens here, but I'll get back to that. Basically, as you go through the intestine, there's less and less absorption and less digestion, and it's mostly waste that goes through the small intestine, okay? The small intestine is connected to the large intestine through the ileocecal valve, which is a sphincter. I'll show you that in the diagram in a second. And this part here I told you about. So the intestine is a little bit special. The longest organ. I hope you guys knew this. But it's connected to the pancreas, and it's connected to the gallbladder. The gallbladder will release these bile juices that will basically deal with lipids, okay? So lipids, they need to be transformed in a way to help digest them. And so this process of transforming them in a special way is called emulsification. And all it means is that it will render them soluble in water so that the enzymes can get to them, okay? So I'll show you that in a second. The pancreas releases many things, including the amylases in your intestine. So the pancreatic, not the salivary amylase. So the pancreatic amylase that will digest the remainder of the carbohydrates. It will also release proteases to digest proteins, and there's many of them. And obviously, same thing with the stomach. There's a release of bicarbonate to neutralize acid, because although there is bicarbonate in your stomach that is released, there is still the acidity of your intestine is not, the pH is not 7, and so you need to deal with this, okay? Anybody know anybody that has their gallbladder removed? You do? Okay, so me, it's my father, and it happened last year. So let me tell you a bit about the gallbladder. How do you know if you have gallbladder problems? Every time you eat food and it gets to the intestine, the gallbladder will receive a signal telling it release the bile juices, right? If it tries to release them and there is a stone blocking the passage here, you will feel it every time you eat. And so it's very easy to know. You eat food, 30 minutes later, suddenly you feel a pain right here. So that's probably the gallbladder that's doing that. And not just like the first time and that's it, like it's repetitive. And this is because there's a hormone that tells your brain to tell the gallbladder to release the juices found here, and they're trying to pass, but there's a stone here that blocks, okay? And so obviously that causes inflammation, and your pain receptors for this are crazy, okay? So you do get it removed. The reason why you have stones most of the time is because of cholesterol. When you eat a lot of food that has cholesterol, the bad cholesterol, not the good cholesterol, they tend to accumulate into the stones. Most of the time you can remove them by taking a drug that breaks down the cholesterol stones. Sometimes you cannot, and you have to do a surgery called cholecystectomy, which is just cutting the gallbladder and removing it. What that means is, I think I'm talking about it later, so I'll keep it for later, but what that means is just you basically have to watch a bit your food, because you cannot eat as much meat and fat as before, and you have to be careful with that, okay? Pancreas, irreplaceable. This is where insulin is produced. So if you have type 1 diabetes, probably it's because your beta cells are not producing the insulin. So there's a kind of a mutation in the gene or something of the sort, okay? Which of the three parts of the intestine is the last? Small intestine. Don't look. Duodenum. Yeah. Ileum. Yes. Okay. Good. You're following. The large intestine also is divided into parts. So there's the ascending intestine, which starts from the right side, the transverse, and then the descending is on the left side. And this is just how it is divided. Actually divided even more than this, but we'll just focus on these. In the large intestine, there's also digestion, but not so much. It's not of great importance, and this is bacteria that's just breaking up stuff, okay? Its main function is to store undigested food and to absorb water. Water is absorbed everywhere, okay? So this just, because it passes through the membrane easily, and so it basically passes anywhere, okay? So you'll always see it, and then the short chain fatty acids and electrolytes. Time is it? Take a break, and then we'll come back. Okay. Enough wrapping for a few minutes. So we'll be back in, what do you guys want, 15, 10? Okay, lift up your hand for 10 minutes. Lift up your hand for 15. 10 minutes win because they want to leave earlier. I understand. Okay. So, what's happening here? Yeah, so this is the large intestine. As I was saying, there's the ascending, descending, and the transverse large intestine, aka the colon, right? There's also a small part called the sigmoid colon. It's just because it's curved. The part where your small intestine feeds the waste to the colon is through the cecum. So there is a sphincter here that links the small intestine to your colon, and it happens here through the cecum, okay? So in this case, what you need to know for digestion is there's not much digestion that happens here. The only stuff that happens is storage of, well, there's a little bit of digestion happening from the bacteria that is found there. 30% I think of your body's bacteria is found in your colon. It mostly serves as a storage organ for waste and water reabsorption organ. So this is where all the water that was with the food gets reabsorbed. And then there is a few things that get absorbed also, as I said, like the fatty acids, right, which I mentioned in the previous slide. Okay. Good. So how do we accomplish chemical digestion? So there's a lot of enzymes involved. So this is kind of a summary where the chemical digestion happens. So the mouth, you have what's called the salivary amylase, and it digests carbohydrates. The stomach, as I told you, has the pepsin in an inactive form, which gets activated through the HCl. And this breaks down proteins. Gastroclipase breaks down lipids. The pancreas will release the pancreatic juice, which in the small intestine, and it contains a lot of things like proteases. You probably know trypsin or chymotrypsin, carboxypeptidase, which digest proteins. Elastase, you can kind of guess from the name, or at least remember it, that it's proteins that are kind of elastic, that are long, so fibrous proteins. Pancreatic, lipases, lipids, esterases, cholesterol. The cholesterol that does not get digested is the one that will cause problems, so your bad cholesterol. The pancreatic amylase also does the same thing as the salivary amylase, so it digests carbohydrates. There's 2 of them. And then in your small intestine, there's also enzymes that are released there, like carboxypeptidase. So this one is made in, is going to digest proteins, right? And it's made in 2 places, the pancreas and the intestine itself. The lipase, sucrase, maltase, and lactase. So sucrase digests sucrose, maltase, maltose, lactase, lactose. Simple. Lactose intolerance, usually it's a problem with this enzyme. Okay? Questions? No, easy. Okay, so we talked about digestion. Now let's think in terms of chemical and mechanical breakdown of food. Now let's talk about the hormones that will tell these different organs to digest in a different way, and to the organs to release these enzymes, right? Because you want them to be released at a specific time, and so there needs to be a coordination of these hormones. The hormones are just messenger molecules that tend to either pass through the membrane without anything, if they are lipid-based, or if they're protein-based, they will usually bind to a receptor protein, and that receptor protein will cause a cascade of events that will lead to the transcription of the specific enzymes, which are then releases, okay? Released into the, for example, there is probably a hormone, without getting too much into the specifics because this is not a biochemistry class, but there's probably a hormone that tells your body that there's food coming, and so we need to release the lipase and pepsin, and so it will bind to a receptor maybe somewhere in your hypothalamus, and that hypothalamus will cause a cascade that will message back to the cells in your stomach, again through a different hormone. That hormone will come to the cells lining your stomach and will tell it it's time to make pepsin and gastric lipase, or to release those enzymes. Okay? Make sense? So one message goes to the brain replies back to the specific cells that need to produce specific enzymes like pepsin or the gastric lipase. So this example that I just showed you is the same. No need to get into the details. You guys learned this into biochemistry, but the hormones, protein hormones, tend to activate a pathway that leads to a secondary messenger that coordinates the whole digestion program in, let's say, the stomach. Okay. Lipids can also act as hormones. What's interesting about lipids is that they can be released. They can go through the membrane without having a requirement for the receptor, and the receptor is usually inside the cell. An example of hormone that is a lipid hormone is testosterone. Testosterone binds to the androgen receptor in its DHT form, so dihydrotestosterone, and so the receptor is found in the cytoplasm, and testosterone is usually released into the bloodstream and then will go inside the cells. Because it is a steroid hormone, it does not require a transporter. It will go through the membrane directly, and so it will bind to the androgen receptor, and the androgen receptor will tell your body it's time to gain muscles, okay? To build, or to basically break down, to gain muscle, and this is unrelated to digestion, so this is just an example about testosterone, okay? The way they act is that the receptor will actually go into the nucleus and will bind to specific genes that will be transcribed. Those specific genes that are transcribed are linked to digestion, for example. Okay. I don't want to get into the specific examples. This is just to give you the differentiation between the lipid hormones and the protein hormones. One acts usually through a cascade of events that lead to a secondary messenger, and the other one and requires a receptor, while the other one can pass through the membrane, and the receptor is usually inside the cell and will go and activate a transcriptional program that will transcribe and translate these enzymes. Okay? Okay, so the key hormones. We talked about the key enzymes. Now we're going to talk about the key hormones involved in digestion. So there's gastrin, secretin, cholecystokinin, and gastric inhibitory peptide. They are all produced at different places, and they target different organs. And their role is just to basically do what I just told you, to activate a program that will tell that organ it's time to produce X, Y, and Z because we need it here. Okay? Gastrin is produced in the stomach by the G cells, if you remember from the earlier slide, and it targets the stomach itself. So this is an auto feedback loop, and it will stimulate. You don't even need to think about these, right? It's in the stomach, so probably it stimulates HCl, pepsin, gastric lipase, right? So you have to think of it like this. You can also think about what could gastrin do in the stomach. Well, the stomach has the feature of this movement, and so it probably stimulates gastric motility, right? So it's just kind of logical for you to remember in the exam. And it also promotes proliferation of gastric mucosal cells. This is the cells that produce the mucus to protect the lining of your stomach. And even them, they get damaged by all this this environment, and so they need to be repaired, right? We need new cells, and so gastrin helps for that. Secretin is produced in the small intestine and targets the pancreas and the stomach. And its role is to promote the secretion of bicarbonate, right? And decrease the motility, the gastric motility. You don't want to have as much motility as before. So when the food reaches, so when you digested the food completely, you don't want your stomach to just keep doing this, right? When it's empty, it stops this movement or slows down in this movement. If you leave the class while I'm teaching, please close the door easily, nicely. Okay, so, cholecystokinin is produced in your small intestine, and this tells the gallbladder to start contracting. It tells the gallbladder to start contracting to release the bile juices that I told you about. And this usually is released towards the end of the digestion in the stomach, and so it will slow the gastric emptying, and it will basically tell your intestine, your pancreas and your gallbladder to secrete those juices inside the intestine to digest whatever is left. Okay, this one, forget about it. I don't want to give you too much information, so just these three here should be enough for you. Okay, but you can learn it if you want. Okay, that's your digestive system. Easy. Now, there are other organs that help in this system. They are called accessory organs. You have your gallbladder, which I told you about, your pancreas, which I told you about, and the liver. The liver is probably the most important organ after the brain, I'd say. Okay, it's so important because it will treat the food, detoxify it, the nutrients that you're gaining, and then distribute them to your body. Okay, a lot of metabolism happens here, and this organ here is very interesting. If you didn't know this, I can tell you this about it. It's the only organ that if you cut almost 60% of it, it will regenerate. Okay, so this is something cool about the liver that does not exist in the other organs. Okay. Obviously, you cannot live without it, not like the gallbladder. Pancreas, same thing, you cannot live without it. Okay? So, I told you the gallbladder's goal is to store the bile, which is produced in the liver, and it's a greenish kind of fluid that will take the fat droplets and make them, emulsify them, make them soluble, kind of solubilize them, right? And so this, what it will do is that it makes the fat globule into smaller pieces, right? Which can increase the surface area for the enzymes to break it down. Okay, because fat tends to go together and they form these bulbs, and so you want to break it into smaller pieces to digest it more easily. Okay, and I told you about CCK hormone that tells the. So in the case of my father, for example, when he eats the food, this is the hormone that was telling you his gallbladder to release the bile and was leading to the pain. Okay. This I told you about earlier. Cholecystectomy. It's the intervention that is done at the hospital to remove your bile. They don't even open you anymore. It's actually very simple. They just make 2 holes and go in with kind of these things like this, and they just go inside and just cut it and then take it out. So it's not a big surgery. And usually it happens because of these stones that form in the duct. Okay? So your liver will produce this bile, and there's a tube that brings it to the gallbladder, which stores it, and then there's a second tube that takes it to the duodenum, where its content is required for emulsification of the lipids. Okay? You can live without it, but you can't eat as much meat and fat. Pancreas. So I've talked about this a bit earlier also. So the pancreas will produce most of the digestive enzymes. So there's the amylase, lipase, and proteases that are made there, and I talked about those earlier. It also makes insulin and glucagon, and these regulate the level of glucose in the blood. Insulin tells your body there's too much glucose, it's time to take it. Glucagon tells your body there's no more glucose, so eat. Okay? And it also produces bicarbonate, which is secreted to neutralize the food, the chyme. The liver, I feel like I'm talking about stuff before the slide, and it's okay. Repetition is key to learning, right? So the liver is one of the most important organs, as I said. It does pretty much anything from detoxify whatever nutrients it gets to metabolize them, to reship them to other parts of your body. Okay? What else did I forget here? Right. When there is no glucose in your body, glucagon will tell the liver to release glucose from glycogen. So glycogen is stored in the liver mostly. Stored in different places, but the liver is the main place where glycogen is found. And glycogen is the storage form of the glucose. Okay. Yeah, this is just some anatomy stuff. So the portal vein will carry the products of digestion to your liver. Okay. Question. If the pancreatic secretion of bicarbonate into the small intestine is blocked, the action of would be inhibited. This one is a bit hard. Yeah? Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so let me, yeah, you got it.
But also it's produced by the pancreas, right?
Mm-hmm.
And goes to the duodenum.
Yeah. So let's.
You need the bicarbonate to neutralize the acidity so that chymotrypsin can do its thing.
Exactly. So let me re-explain this. So this question, when you read it at first, you're like, whoa, what the hell is happening? Okay. So when you are talking about what enzymes work and you're talking about pH, directly you have to think about the places where the enzymes in the answer are found. Salivary amylase is found in your mouth. The mouth has a pH of 7.4. 7.4. Yeah. So neutral pH. So this one works at normal pH, neutral pH. Pepsin and gastric lipase, they work at acidic pH, right? So if the pancreatic secretion of bicarbonate into the small intestine is blocked, well, this one is not really in the intestine, so we don't care about it. What's found in the intestine is the chymotrypsin, right? So that's the only thing that's found. So you don't even need to think about these. So chymotrypsin is the only one that is found in the intestine, okay? Pepsin, gastric lipase, mostly pepsin is actually, pepsin and gastric lipase require low pH, and so they're found in the stomach. Chymotrypsin is found in the duodenum, and so just think about this, okay? Is it clear? Yes, not clear? Not okay? No? Let's argue. Okay, you can tell me after if you want. Okay. So we talked about digestion. Let's talk about absorption. So how do we absorb now these small molecules these large molecules that we broke them down into smaller molecules to facilitate their absorption? And so the absorption is just the process of taking the molecules from outside the cell into the cell. There's a small amount of absorption that happens in the stomach, but most of it is in the small intestine. So the intestine has a membrane, a mucosal membrane. So there's a mucosal membrane everywhere in your GI tract, okay? So let's start by that to remove it from the whole story. Your intestine is made in a way where it forms these folds called villi, and each villi has microvilli in it, okay? So these villi, their goal is to increase the surface area of your intestine so you can absorb more food at the same time, okay? Because if you imagine your intestine like this, well, if there's food blocking the whole place, then the rest of the nutrients will not go through and will wait for this part to be absorbed. And so the villi increase the surface area, and so there's more place from where you can enter the bloodstream, okay? The villi inside of them have two things. They have capillaries, so this is your blood system, and they have these small, the equivalent of a capillary, but for your lymphatic system is called a lacteal, okay? Now, what is your lymphatic system doing in absorption? I'll tell you that in a second. The cells that absorb on the villi are called enterocytes. And if you need a way to remember it, they're trying to absorb, so enter site. Site refers to cells, okay? As I said, so it looks pretty much like this. So you have this membrane here, and then each part is a villi, and inside the villi, if you zoom on it, you have these microvilli, right? And these are the enterocytes that will take in the food, the nutrients, sorry, I keep saying food. Inside the villi, obviously, when the nutrients go in, they need to go through your bloodstream and through the lymphatic system. So you have your capillaries and your lacteal, which look like this. You guys know what the lymphatic system is for, right? It's so you have your bloodstream, which is important for carrying oxygen in part, but also nutrients. Your lymphatic system is a system that resembles the bloodstream, but its goal is to carry dead cells to fight pathogens, and so anything that is bacteria, virus, and immune system cells, they go through there. But there's also the absorption of lipids that goes through the lymphatic system, okay? So when we're talking about absorption through the cell membrane, there are 4 types. There's passive diffusion. Passive diffusion, it can just pass through the membrane because it's either small or it's hydrophobic, and so it can go through easily. For example, lipids, they don't really mind the bilayer. They can just go through it. Some lipid, not all of them. Vitamin C can pass through without anything, passive diffusion. Water, obviously. Facilitated diffusion means that you need a transporter. So you need a protein, a transmembrane protein, that will carry whatever you're transporting through it. But because it's facilitated, it does not require energy. So you just open and it can go through it. Okay? An example of it is fructose. the most abundant sugar in fruits and the healthiest form of sugar. Okay? Active transport requires energy and a protein to carry it. An example of it is glucose. Amino acids are polar, because some of them are apolar, but they still require an active transport. And minerals. Anything that has charge most of the time requires a transporter. A type of lipids that requires a transporter are phospholipids. So phospholipids contain a phosphate group and different head groups like serine, choline, etc. And so those require an active transport. But in general, lipids can pass easily through the membrane without having any energy or any transporter. And the last type is endocytosis. And endocytosis is going to take up the big stuff that was not necessarily completely digested. For example, proteins or antibodies in milk. Casein goes inside the cells through, if you remember I told you casein last lecture is the most abundant protein in milk. Well, it goes through endocytosis, okay? And antibodies are too big to, carry with transporters, so you need a way to kind of eat up the antibody, okay? In picture, it looks like this. So passive diffusion goes directly like this. Facilitated transport requires a carrier protein but no energy. And then if you have active transport, you need the energy and the transporter. And phagocytosis or endocytosis, which are just two terms to say the same thing, you basically eat up the nutrients and form these micelles that will take, or these liposomes that will take the nutrients inside the cell. Basic biochemistry, easy up to now? No? Questions? Okay, good. So, this one should be easy, I just told you about. So, Jonathan, or Younes, is drinking a protein shake, and it has amino acids. How will they be absorbed? Yeah? Active transport, yeah. If I said proteins from the protein shake. Yeah? Yeah. Not all of them, but most of them. Okay, because they're too big. Usually you think about it this way. Smallest to biggest molecule. And that's it. Okay, I told you about the lymphatic system, which is similar to your blood system. Sometimes they even there's one lymphatic node next to, not lymphatic node, but these lacteals that are, or lymphatic capillaries that are close to the blood capillaries, and they're just one next to the other, right? And so blood will travel through the cardiovascular system and bring the nutrients everywhere in your body. The lacteals, they will pick up lipids, and they also contain the immune cells that I told you about to fight the microbes. Okay. What happens if you take a lot of lipids to your bloodstream? Let's say you overload your lymphatic system and it cannot carry the lipids. What happens to your bloodstream? Why is lipid not carried primarily in your bloodstream? Yep. Actually, it's not soluble, and so it will do something to your capillaries. Yeah.
Won't it fog your capillaries?
Exactly. Exactly. So you don't want to carry lipids through your bloodstream, but they do go through it, but not as much as the lymphatic system. Why? Because lipids, they tend to form these conglomerates, let's say, of lipids, and you don't want that in your bloodstream. Because what happens is that if it blocks the bloodstream, then you might have a heart attack, okay? And the disease for increased lipids on the lining of your bloodstream is called atherosclerosis, okay? You can Google it up. And so lipids first go through here. Sometimes they start accumulating in your bloodstream when you reach your 50s and 60s, just because of old age. Or when you are younger and you eat too much fat, it will lead to deposits of lipids on your capillaries, veins, arteries, and that can lead to the heart attack. Okay? Next question. What nutrients are transported from the epithelial cells of the intestine to the vascular system? What is the first organ to receive them? I said it kind of. So you have nutrients, now you need to do something with them. Where do you send them? The liver, exactly. The liver is the processing center of metabolites. So you broke down everything, now you need to make sure that there's no waste in it. So the liver will detoxify that mixture that it receives through the portal vein. And it will metabolize whatever it has to metabolize. So a lot of the reactions happen in your liver. For example, glucose to glycogen. So glucose to glycogen, the glycogen will stay in the liver, but there are other reactions that will lead to different molecules that are sent elsewhere. Okay? So the liver is the first one to get them. Okay, what time is it? 8, not bad. We're good. How does the body coordinate and regulate the digestion? So we talked about the hormones, but more specifically in the mechanical sense, we have to talk about the neuromuscular system. So nerves, muscular, muscles, right? And this will control the digestion and absorption of your body. And so the contractions and secretions of the GI tract that I talked about are caused by the enteric nervous system in the gut wall. You don't need to know the specifics of it. Both the parasympathetic and sympathetic nerves are involved, okay, which are part of the peripheral nervous system. Parasympathetic and sympathetic are just two different nervous categories of the PNS. Some of them are controlled by you, others not, right? For example, the chewing is something that you control, but the peristalsis, you don't control it, right? So this is the para and the sympathetic. And obviously, your nervous system, your central nervous system, which is the brain and the spinal cord, also play a role in this because they direct the peripheral nervous system. So peripheral nervous system is just the nerves that are coming from your spine and going to any place in your body, while the central nervous system is the brain and the spinal cord, mostly, okay? Basically, your whole body. It's just the different parts of your nervous system that are important to know, okay? This I talked about. Did I forget something? Yeah, the rhythmic contractions I told you about, which is the peristalsis, just movements in kind of a sinus function, let's say, which just contract, relax at a specific rhythm to move the food in your body. The segmentations in the colon that contract are called haustras. So even the column has to move the food, right? And so these segmentations are called haustras. And in the large intestine, the mass movement usually is to move the waste outside. So I guess you guys all know this. I don't need to explain it. Whew. Can't breathe anymore. The disorders. So let's talk about the disorders linked to the digestive system. So obviously, if anything messed up in this system, you're going to have disorders, and usually they target one of the 4 things. You have disorders of the neuromuscular system. For example, if you have a problem with the sphincters, because they don't open and close properly, you can have gastric reflux, right? If it's the sphincter that's between the esophagus and the stomach. You can have hormonal imbalance, and this one is the most complex, I would say, because it affects pretty much anything in your body, in the sense that if you're pregnant, the hormones are going to be different from someone that is working out, from someone that is sedentary, from someone that is overweight. And so the hormonal imbalance kind of plays on digestion, absorption, and elimination, okay? Infections, I'll talk about this in a second. Allergies, same thing. So when I talk about allergies, for example, intolerance, gluten intolerance, which is, I'm going to get to it, okay? And then obviously if digestion, absorption, are affected for a long period of time, then you end up with malnutrition, right? It makes sense because you're not breaking down things and you're not absorbing it properly, and so you end up with the deficiencies that I talked about a bit earlier, okay? Burping and gas. So this, I guess I don't have to explain much. Burping usually happens because of swallowing too much air, eating too fast. This, you probably heard it from your mom, don't eat too fast. Well, this is one of the causes. This one probably will surprise you. So improperly fitted denture, so it allows in air. Passing gas, so this is a normal process, and if I actually tell you the normal amount in a day, you would find it very weird. It's about 10 to 15 times. Now you guys are probably thinking this is not normal, but the actual number of times is 10 to 15 times, which is a bit weird, but I guess this is what the medical field says. It's usually caused by foods that are rich in fibers. So fiber is good and it's not good. It helps you with passing the food more easily, so it avoids constipation. So fiber is needed for preventing that, but too much of it can lead to intestinal gas. Okay. Additionally, bacteria in your gut, they are fermenting stuff, and because they're fermenting stuff, they're producing gas. And so this is another reason. So obviously, if your gut microbiome is messed up because you are eating foods that are too rich in probiotics, well, that will lead to more bacteria, and because there's more bacteria, more gas. Okay. Heartburn, this is what I talked about, and this is the word I could not find earlier. So gastroesophageal reflux disease. So this is a disease where you have an issue with your sphincter between the esophagus and the stomach, and because it does not open and close properly, it remains kind of open, and so the acid goes backwards, and so you're always feeling acidic and tasting acidic. It's not the best feeling, but this is one of the diseases that affects the nervous system, let's say, the neuromuscular system. Heartburn, so heartburn is just a nicer way is just the acute version of the gastroesophageal reflux disease. So when this happens all the time and it's chronic, it becomes GERD. Sorry for the picture, but the other thing that can happen in your GI tract is ulcers. Anybody? Well, actually, that's not a good question to ask. Actually, you know what? Who cares? If you don't care, anybody had this? No? Okay. You did? Okay. So when I was diagnosed with celiac disease, they found that I also had ulcers. And actually, you don't feel it. Most of the time, you don't feel it. And so, but sometimes you do. So they do this. They put the camera and they just check what's up in there. And then you end up taking 3. I will not tell you because that's the next question. I almost gave you the answer. But they're just, they're caused by pepsin just breaking up stuff in your GI tract and the HCl, which I told you about. And so it breaks up the protective layer. And then what happens is that bacteria from the food will lodge itself in there and then cause these ulcers, which are inflammations of the skin. Okay? Do you guys have an idea how this, this bacteria causes ulcers? Okay, this is not quiz stuff, okay, because you have no idea probably about this. So it's just the inflammation that it causes, right? And so there's a swelling of the skin, and it's due to the recruitment of the immune system cells, etc. Good. Which of the following would be the most appropriate for treating a peptic ulcer? Yeah. Damn it. I tried. Okay. It's antibiotics because you need to take care of the bacteria, and usually you use a tritherapy, so 3 antibiotics at the same time. Okay. I think you take it, if I remember correctly, for a month. A month? I don't know. But 3 antibiotics, and it will take care of that. Okay. Not aspirin, not ibuprofen, because they're both extra inflammation. They're both inflammatory, anti-inflammatory, and so that can actually affect your immune system, and we're talking about bacteria and immune system, and you don't want to play with the inflammation, okay? Even though it is caused by the inflammation, there are specific types of inflammations, and that's all I'm telling you, okay? Stop eating spicy food. It can help, but we didn't talk about spicy food right now, so I guess we're talking about bacteria, so antibiotic. It can help though, because spicy food does hurt in the sense that you have these lesions in your, but it's not the most correct answer. You want to treat it, cure it, not just feel a little bit better and then get back to it, okay? Food intolerance. So one distinction that is important to make is food allergy and food intolerance. So food intolerance causes a multitude of symptoms in your GI, gas, pain, diarrhea, and it occurs because of you eat a specific food. For example, gluten. And I know I keep repeating the same example, but it's a very good example. Food allergy is not the same as intolerance. It causes an anaphylactic shock in your body, okay? And so this one can kill you quite quickly on the spot if you don't have your EpiPen. This one kills you slowly as you keep eating it, okay? Make sense? Anybody allergic to food here? Probably a few. Okay. Anybody allergic to chocolate? No? To Maria knows why. Anybody allergic to lint? Let's say that. No? Okay, good. Because I tend to bring chocolate for the exam, so I'm that type of prof, even though we're in a nutrition class, you know. Maybe this time I'll bring apples, you know, or protein shake. Yeah, so next, celiac disease. I talked about it a million times. I'll just add a few information. The first one is, I told you that it damages the small intestine. Now you know that it breaks the villi. This is where the reaction happens. So gliadin, the protein found in gluten, which is found in wheat, rye, and barley, goes to the enterocytes, and when it gets there, it's about to be absorbed, but then the immune system recognizes it as something wrong, and it comes and destroys everything near it. And so when it comes and destroys everything near it, you lose your microvilli, and then if you do it for a long time, you lose your villi also. And when you lose your villi, well, absorption does not happen. So then you can eat up so much food, and you still don't gain weight. You still don't grow up, and basically it doesn't work. So you need to follow kind of a gluten-free diet. Not the diet that you saw on Instagram about people saying that it is healthy or whatever. This is actually a medical necessity. Although it's been found that gluten is actually not that good for you in recent research. So people are trying to avoid gluten. Anybody here trying to avoid it? No? Nobody has celiac disease? No? Okay. Damn, I'm special. The way you do this, gotta have fun, you know. The way you figure this out is usually through blood tests or through the gastroscopy. So they put a camera and they just go and cut a piece of the villi and they take a look at it to see what's happening to it. Is it damaged or not? And this is one of the most annoying diseases to heal from because it takes a few months to get back to normal. So if you've cheated on the disease for a few years like I did when I was younger, it takes about 2 years to start feeling like normal energy, normal levels, right? I used to be able to eat like 2-3 poutines in a row, and I'm not even exaggerating, normally, like if nothing. And the next day, I'm maybe lost a kilogram. That's how, that's how useless the food kind of was. And so usually you supplement it with vitamins, and there's many diseases like this that exist. I wrote advice, but mandatory most likely. Diarrhea. Diarrhea is caused mainly because of your colon. So I told you that the absorption of water happens in the colon. If you don't reabsorb the water, that leads to diarrhea, and so it's just a frequent passage of watery stools. It happens also through infection, right? Food intolerance, stress before a final exam, reaction to medication. There's many things that affect this. It can lead to dehydration. This is true and not true. It used to lead to severe dehydration, but more recently, now that people are aware of it, that it's not as much of a problem. But I remember when I was younger in my country, like this used to be a problem, right? Because people were not, I shouldn't generalize, but people were not as educated about health as they are now because of, internet and all that stuff. And so this was not clear. So they would think it's just, the food was not good, and then they leave the kid there without hydrating the kid, and then something happens to the kid, right? And so one place where dehydration actually happens is when you have traveler's diarrhea. And this, if you went to Cuba the first time or a few times, you probably, or maybe not, I don't know. Or if you travel to other places, you will probably at least have it once in your life. It's mostly dangerous. So the dehydration is mostly dangerous to children and elderly, and just because they're not as aware of their health state as an adult, so the kid will not complain, and the elderly will think he's just tired or something like this, and this can kill you, okay? Traveler's diarrhea is called dysentery, and it's usually caused by tap water most of the time, or street food. There are some countries where they do not have to pasteurize milk. So this is the process where you basically heat it up and pressure it to the point where it kills all the microorganisms, or most of them. And so if you don't do that, then you end up with a lot of disease. And if you're not from that country, you don't have an immune system to it. You did not build the immunity to it, and so that can lead to those problems. Also, fun fact, some countries, they sell you bottled water, and you think it's coming from a big factory, but they fill it by themselves from the tap water to make money. So this is one of the reasons. So you would see it as if it's a brand water, but in reality it's filled out from tap water. So be careful with that. This you probably know. You've heard this for sure. Signs and symptoms of dehydration. I'll give you the only one that you need. If you take your skin like this and you pull up your skin like this and you push against it, if it comes back down easily, that means you're hydrated. If it stays and does not come down, that means you are dehydrated. Easy, okay? Obviously, thirst, if you're dehydrated, you're probably thirsty, right? The other ones are quite simple. You probably, did anybody hear of this trick? Yeah? Where are you from?
Where am I?
Yeah.
Where I'm from?
Yeah. Middle East?
Yeah.
Okay. So our countries are very hot. So this is where you learn. You learned it too? But I saw it's the shim, so maybe this is related? No? No? Where are you? Did you learn it from your parents?
Yeah, my mom.
Okay, good. So this is an old trick that tells you if you're hydrated or not. So if you're outside at Parc Jean Drapeau and it's 2 p.m. and you didn't drink, do this, or just go drink water. It could work too. Constipation, the last slide to finish it nicely. When there's too much water that is absorbed in the large intestine, it does the opposite than diarrhea, which is no water being absorbed, and so hard to pass stools. Cool? Good. So that's it for today. I'll see you on Thursday. Next classes, if you have questions, please ask me before, not at the end of the lecture. Not at the end of the lecture, because we all want to leave, and I would love to go home. But I'll also have office hours Thursday from 5:15 p.m. to 6:15 p.m.
A lot of water, not fluid.
Yeah.
But it says prevention including kind of fluid.
Sorry? Because what happens is that you... fluids. Because what happens is that your large intestine absorbs all the water, and so now there's no more water in the excess in the waist, and so it blocks. So you need to drink water to help it.
Yeah, this happens when you don't drink enough water.
Exactly.
The diarrhea happens when you have like excess water.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Good.